They say you never really know someone until you live with them. But what if you've lived with someone for years, only to realize that they've been a stranger all along? This thought echoed in Sophia's mind as she stared out of the window, watching the golden rays of the setting sun dance across the skyline of Manhattan. The city that never sleeps, that was supposed to be her life, yet she felt like a shadow in it. She had it all, the luxury penthouse, the expensive cars, and the status of being married to one of the wealthiest men in the world. But still, something was missing. And it wasn't the diamond necklace or the designer shoes that could fill the void. It was the one thing money couldn't buy: attention. For the past 10 years, she had been invisible in her marriage. Her husband, Vincent, a billionaire CEO, had never once taken her to a party, never once made her feel like she was the center of his world. To him, she was just an accessory, a beautiful face by his side at business events, but never part of his actual life. Every time an invitation to a gala, a benefit, or a party came through, Vincent went alone, leaving her behind every single time. She had grown accustomed to it, at least she thought she had. But the truth was, it ate away at her, piece by piece. She was married to a man who, despite all his success, had never truly seen her. And after all this time, she couldn't ignore the emptiness anymore. It wasn't just the absence of grand events, it was the absence of him. Vincent was always busy, always immersed in work, always wrapped up in his world, while hers had slowly withered away. The woman who once dreamed of a fairy tale life was now a shell of herself, trapped in a gilded cage. But that was about to change. Sophia wasn't going to be the forgotten wife any longer. She had been silent for far too long, living in the background of Vincent's story. Now, she was ready to speak her own, and she would do it in the most unexpected way. She would show him what it meant to be seen, to be heard, and most importantly, to be respected. As she prepared for the evening, she felt a strange sense of calm. No more tears, no more begging for attention. She wasn't going to chase his love anymore. She was going to take back her own power. Tonight would be her night. Sophia stood before the mirror, adjusting the crimson dress that clung to her curves like it was made just for her. It wasn't just a dress, it was armor. And tonight, she was going to use it to take back control. She smiled at her reflection, a woman reborn. She had spent so many years suppressing her true self, hiding behind the mask of the perfect wife. But not anymore. Tonight, she would step into the world, not as Vincent's forgotten wife, but as a force to be reckoned with. It was time to take the spotlight for herself and let the world see who she truly was. "I'm not the same woman I was before," Sophia whispered to herself as she stared out of the car window, watching the city lights flicker by. The cool night air brushed against her skin, but the warmth inside her heart was undeniable. That night, something had shifted. The woman who had been invisible for so long had finally made herself seen. She had stood tall and proud in front of Vincent, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was a shadow in her own life. As the car made its way through the winding streets of Manhattan, Sophia couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Vincent had always believed he could have it all: his empire, his power, and his perfect wife who stood quietly by his side, always in the background. But tonight, that narrative had changed. The woman who had been neglected, forgotten, was now the one everyone was talking about. She wasn't just Vincent's wife anymore. She was Sophia, a woman in control of her own destiny. The moment she walked into that room, she knew things would never be the same. Vincent had watched her with a mix of confusion and admiration, a look she had never seen from him before. For years, she had tried to please him, tried to fit into the mold he had created for their marriage. But now, she realized that the mold was suffocating her, and she was breaking free from it. The more she moved through the room, the more she felt the weight of all the years of neglect and silence lifting off her shoulders. Vincent had taken her for granted, but now he was the one left to question everything. The power had shifted, and he was powerless to stop it. She wasn't angry, nor was she seeking revenge. She was simply reclaiming what was always hers: her own life, her own voice, and her own worth. As the night unfolded, Sophia knew that she wasn't going to wait around for Vincent to come to his senses. She had waited long enough. It was time to take charge of her own future. She didn't need him. She didn't need anyone to validate her existence. All she needed was herself. And that realization was freeing. The next day, Sophia woke up with a sense of clarity. She no longer felt like she was living in a haze, hoping things would get better. She was done waiting. She was going to make things happen for herself. No more pretending. No more holding back. It was time to build the life she had always dreamed of. She took a deep breath, looked at herself in the mirror, and smiled. For the first time in years, it was a smile of true happiness. She wasn't the woman who had been left behind. She was the woman who had stepped into her own power, and nothing would stand in her way. I never thought I would be free, Sophia said to herself as she walked out of the office building, the crisp air of the early morning brushing against her skin. Her heels clicked confidently against the pavement, a sound that, for the first time, felt like a declaration. She had spent so many years in the background, supporting Vincent in every way, from managing his social calendar to hiding her own dreams and desires. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was moving forward, not just for herself, but because she had taken back what was hers. The world outside her had always seemed so vast, so intimidating. But now it felt different. She felt a part of it. She had broken free from the invisible chains of her marriage. Vincent's absence in her life no longer felt like a void. It was more like a space waiting to be filled with her own plans, her own achievements. The night at the party had been the turning point. She had realized that she didn't need Vincent's approval to feel whole. She didn't need his validation to succeed. And for the first time in a long while, she was excited about what came next. The work that had once felt like a distraction, a way to pass the time, now felt like a mission. Every meeting she attended, every project she took on, was no longer just for survival. It was for growth. As Sophia made her way to her next meeting, she couldn't help but smile. Her career had always been important to her, but she had never fully allowed herself to embrace it. It had always taken a back seat to Vincent's career and his needs. Now, she was ready to take the lead. She had started a new company, a startup that focused on sustainable fashion. It was a dream she had held for years, one that Vincent had never understood. He had always dismissed it as a passing interest, something frivolous. But now, it was a reality. As she walked into the boardroom for her first major pitch, she felt the rush of excitement she hadn't felt in ages. The team she had assembled was strong, passionate, and ready to take on the world. They believed in her vision, in the future she was creating, and that belief fueled her even more. The meeting went better than expected. The investors were intrigued by her ideas, impressed by her knowledge, and most importantly, they saw the fire in her eyes. It wasn't just about making money. It was about changing the world. By the time the meeting ended, Sophia knew she had made her mark. The startup was going to succeed. She had no doubt about it. Walking out of the building, she felt different, more confident. She wasn't the woman who had been ignored and dismissed. She wasn't the woman who had been forgotten. She was the woman who was now in control of her own future. The next few months were a blur of hard work, late nights, and constant learning. But it was also a period of growth. Sophia had never felt more alive. She had redefined herself, not just as Vincent's wife, but as an entrepreneur, a leader, and a woman who had found her own voice. And as she sat in her office late one night, reviewing the numbers and projections for the next quarter, she thought back to the days when she felt like a ghost in her own life. It felt like a lifetime ago. She had come so far. But the best part was, she was just getting started. "I'm standing in the middle of my empire," Sophia whispered to herself as she gazed out of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office. The city spread out below her, a vast network of lights and buildings that represented the future she was building, the future she had fought for. It had been a year since that fateful night when she stepped into the spotlight, and the transformation had been nothing short of extraordinary. Her business had grown, the team was thriving, and most importantly, she had found the strength to keep pushing forward, even when it seemed like the world was against her. Sophia had become a force in the fashion industry, a woman who was not just about creating beautiful clothing, but about making a statement with every piece. Her brand was now synonymous with sustainability, empowerment, and resilience. She had become the leader she had always dreamed of being, and nothing was going to take that away from her. But even as she basked in the success she had worked so hard to achieve, a part of her couldn't help but reflect on the past, on the man who had once been her husband, the man who had never seen her for who she truly was. Vincent. She hadn't heard from him in months, and while part of her felt a sense of relief, Another part of her wondered if he had ever truly realized what he had lost. Sophia had always believed in the idea of love, but now she realized that love was not enough. It was not enough to be a wife, to be a shadow in someone's life. Love had to be a partnership, a mutual respect, and a shared vision. And Vincent had never given her that. As she sat in her office, reviewing the latest projections for her company, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Sophia, it's Vincent." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear from him, not after everything that had happened. She opened the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. "I've been thinking a lot about you," it read. "About what I did. I'm sorry, Sophia. I made a mistake. Can we talk?" She stared at the screen for a moment, her mind racing. The past year had been a journey of self-discovery, of reclaiming her life and her power. She had spent so long waiting for Vincent's validation, for his love, but she didn't need that anymore. She didn't need him, not in the way she once had. Her finger hovered over the keyboard as she considered her response. She could say what she had always wanted to say, the words she had kept bottled up for so long. She could let him know how much he had hurt her, how much he had taken her for granted. But then she paused. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about her. She didn't need closure from him. She had already found it within herself. With a deep breath, she typed her response. "I'm doing just fine, Vincent. I've moved on. I don't need to talk." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. And with that, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was peace. Sophia knew that she had made the right decision. She had already built a life that was full of purpose, full of meaning, and it didn't need to include someone who had never valued her. As the days passed, Vincent's message became just another memory, fading into the background of her life. She had no time to look back. She was too focused on the future. The future she was creating for herself, the one she had dreamed of for so long. She had everything she needed now. She had her career, her passion, and most importantly, she had herself. And that was more than enough. "I've never felt more alive," Sophia said to herself as she stood in front of her new office building, taking in the busy streets of New York City. The world was moving at a pace that matched her heartbeat now. She had come a long way since that night, when she stepped into the party and realized just how much she had been undervalued. The transformation, the growth, it had all led to this point, standing at the cusp of a future that was entirely her own. She had done it. She had built her empire. Her brand was flourishing, and every decision she made felt like a step towards her ultimate vision. She was a woman who had reclaimed her power, and now she was ready to take on the world with a sense of purpose and confidence she had never known before. As she walked into her office, she felt a sense of pride swelling in her chest. Her team was more than just a group of people working for her. They were a family, all sharing the same dream. They had trusted her from the beginning, and now they were all building something incredible together. Sophia had always known that she was capable of so much more than what Vincent had allowed her to be. But now, with her own company, her own identity, she was unstoppable. But even as she focused on her work, the echoes of her past still lingered. It had been months since Vincent's message, and yet a part of her couldn't help but wonder about the man who had once been her world. She had let go of him in every way that mattered, but there was still a piece of her that remembered the way he used to look at her, the way he had promised things would change. But she had realized something important during those long months of self-discovery. Change didn't come from waiting for someone else to change. It came from within. And that was exactly what she had done. She had changed herself. She had taken control of her own life. And in doing so, she had found a power she never knew she had. It wasn't about getting revenge or proving anything to Vincent. It was about proving to herself that she didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. That realization had set her free. One evening, as she sat in her office working late, a call came through. It was an unfamiliar number, but she answered it without hesitation. "Sophia," a familiar voice said, and for a moment she froze. "It's me, Vincent." Her heart beat a little faster, but she quickly composed herself. She hadn't heard from him in so long, and honestly, she didn't know what to expect. "I've been following what you've been doing," Vincent continued. "I see your company is doing well." There was a pause, and Sophia could feel his words hanging in the air. "I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." A strange silence filled the line. Sophia hadn't expected those words, and yet, they didn't affect her the way she thought they would. In the past, this would have been the moment when she would have softened, when she would have let his words in, hoping for the closure she never received. But now, she realized she didn't need it. "Thank you, Vincent," she said calmly, her voice steady. "But I'm doing just fine." She hung up the phone without any dramatic closing, just the quiet certainty that she had made peace with everything. That chapter of her life was over. And as she looked out the window at the skyline once again, she knew her journey was far from finished. She was only getting started. She had the world at her feet, and this time, it was all on her terms. Sophia wasn't just building a business. She was building a legacy of strength, independence, and resilience. And she would never stop. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready for whatever came next. "I've reached the top, but it's not enough," Sophia thought as she stared out the window, looking down at the vibrant city below her. The city that once felt like a distant dream, now her reality. It had been months since Vincent's call, and every day felt like another affirmation of her independence. She had built something remarkable, a legacy that was truly hers. But there was a nagging feeling inside her, a desire for something more, something that went beyond professional success. The feeling wasn't about missing Vincent or longing for the life they once had. No, it was something deeper. She had spent so long building her empire that she had forgotten about her personal life, about finding joy in things beyond the hustle. The work had consumed her, and she was starting to realize that she had no balance. She needed to find that part of herself again, the one that had dreams and desires outside of her business. That night, after finishing up some final emails and reviewing the numbers for the week, Sophia decided it was time to take a step back and focus on herself. It was time to reconnect with who she was before all of this. The woman who had once dreamed of traveling the world, experiencing new things, and finding love that didn't require validation or sacrifice. She knew that she had put herself on hold for too long, always prioritizing everyone else's needs, always focusing on the next business deal or the next big launch. But now it was her time. She booked a spontaneous trip to a small town in Tuscany, hoping that the quiet would give her the peace she needed to reflect. The next morning, she found herself on a plane, the excitement of the unknown swirling inside her. She was used to the hustle and bustle of city life, but this was different. This was a chance for her to breathe, to slow down, and to rediscover the joy she had once lost in the chaos. Tuscany was everything she had hoped for: rolling hills, vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see, and a sense of tranquility that calmed her racing thoughts. As she walked through the cobblestone streets, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in years. There was something about the simplicity of the place that reminded her of who she truly was beneath all the layers of success and ambition. Sophia spent her days exploring the countryside, indulging in long conversations with locals, and enjoying the beauty of each moment without any rush. It was during one of these afternoons, as she sipped wine on the balcony of a small villa overlooking the vineyards, that she realized something profound. She had been so focused on proving her worth to others, especially Vincent, that she had forgotten to prove her worth to herself. She had always thought that success in business would fill the emptiness, but now she saw that the true fulfillment came from within. The realization hit her like a wave, and for the first time in months, she felt a deep sense of contentment. She didn't need anyone to validate her. She was enough just as she was. By the end of the week, Sophia returned to New York, renewed and ready to take on whatever came next. She had found peace within herself, and it was clear that the next chapter of her life would be different. She wasn't going to stop growing, but she wasn't going to sacrifice her happiness for success either. As she returned to the office, the weight she had carried for so long seemed lighter. She could feel the shift within her. She had finally achieved the balance she had been seeking. It wasn't just about building a business or gaining recognition. It was about finding the joy in the journey, in the quiet moments, in being true to herself. Sophia smiled as she sat at her desk, knowing that she was not just a successful businesswoman, but a woman who had learned to love herself first. And that, she realized, was the most important success of all. "I've finally found peace," Sophia whispered to herself as she leaned back in her office chair, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The journey to this point had been long and filled with challenges, but as she watched the city's lights twinkle below her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of calm. The woman who had once felt invisible, trapped in a marriage that drained her, had transformed into someone who now controlled her destiny. She had built a life she was proud of, but more importantly, she had found herself. The business was thriving, her team was flourishing, and her personal growth was something she could finally acknowledge with confidence. The quiet moments she had found in Tuscany had brought her back to herself, reminding her that the true power came not from others' expectations, but from within. As Sophia moved forward, she understood that life wasn't just about success in business. It was about balance, about enjoying the journey, and about being the woman she was meant to be. She had realized that her worth was not tied to anyone's opinion, not even Vincent's. She had spent too many years hoping for validation from him, from the man who had failed to see her for who she truly was. And now, with every step she took, she was proving to herself that she didn't need that approval to feel complete. One evening, after another successful business meeting, Sophia found herself reflecting on the changes in her life. It had been over a year since she had last heard from Vincent, and while part of her still wondered if he would ever truly understand the impact of his actions, she wasn't dwelling on it anymore. She had made peace with her past and was focused on the future. Her life now was not defined by the shadow of a marriage that had once held her captive. Instead, she was living her life on her terms, setting her own goals, and making her own dreams a reality. As she looked over her plans for the next few months, she felt a sense of anticipation. The future was wide open, and she had so many more ambitions to chase. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about living fully, about experiencing everything life had to offer without the constraints she once imposed on herself. She was no longer afraid of the unknown. The unknown was where opportunity thrived. It was where she could grow even further. Sophia had learned to trust her instincts, to take risks, and to embrace every new chapter with an open heart. As she prepared for a new round of meetings, she knew there would be challenges ahead, but they no longer intimidated her. The confidence she had built over the past year, the self-love and respect she had cultivated, were stronger than any obstacle she could face. She was ready. She wasn't just a successful businesswoman. She was a woman who had learned how to live her life on her own terms, with joy, with strength, and with purpose. There would always be more to achieve, but for the first time, she was learning to appreciate the journey. Sophia's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant about the next big presentation, but this time, it didn't feel like a wait. It felt like a step toward something greater, a step toward the life she had always deserved. As she read the message, she smiled to herself. She was more than just a survivor. She was a woman who had created her own legacy, one that would inspire others for years to come. I've learned more in the past year than I ever thought possible, Sophia thought as she sat in her office, reviewing the latest quarterly report for her company. It had been an incredible journey, one filled with moments of doubt, growth, and self-discovery. But now, as she looked at the results of her hard work, she realized just how far she had come. The numbers spoke for themselves. The company was thriving, and her vision was becoming a reality. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of creating something meaningful. The past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She had found her voice, her strength, and, most importantly, her peace. As she glanced around the office, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything she had built. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself when she first married Vincent, but it was the life she had earned. It was a life she had chosen. The success she had achieved was not just about financial wealth or professional accolades. It was about the confidence she had found in herself. Sophia had learned that true fulfillment came from within, and it wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. That lesson had been hard-earned, but now it was her greatest asset. The ringing of her phone broke her train of thought. It was a message from her assistant, reminding her of a charity event she was scheduled to attend that evening. At one point, she would have dreaded such events, knowing they were a constant reminder of her role as Vincent's wife, a woman who was overlooked and underappreciated. But now, as she read the message, she felt a sense of calm. She was attending as Sophia, the successful businesswoman, the woman who had built her own empire and was respected in her own right. That evening, as she entered the event, the familiar faces of high society mingled around her. There was a time when she had felt like an outsider in these circles, always trying to fit in, always trying to please others. But tonight, she didn't need to try. She moved through the crowd with confidence, exchanging pleasantries with old acquaintances and making new connections. She had earned her place in this world, not because of her marriage to Vincent, but because of her own achievements. As she took her seat at the table, she looked around at the people she had once tried so hard to impress. Now, it was their turn to be impressed by her. They were no longer the ones who held the power. She did. Vincent's absence was felt in more ways than one. She had long since stopped looking for his approval, but part of her still wondered if he ever realized what he had lost. The man who had once ignored her, who had never taken her to any of these events, was now the one left on the outside. Sophia smiled to herself as she sipped her wine. She didn't need to think about Vincent anymore. The past had taught her that her worth was not tied to anyone else's validation. She had found her own path, and it was leading her toward a future that was filled with endless possibilities. As the night wore on, she felt a sense of pride. She wasn't just a survivor of her past. She was a creator of her own future. And that future was more brilliant than she could have ever imagined. The past few months had flown by in a blur, but every step forward had been one of growth, strength, and undeniable progress. Sophia had built her company from the ground up, and now, as she looked at the figures for the next quarter, she couldn't help but smile. Everything was falling into place. She had created a legacy, one that was her own, free from the shadows of her past, from the man who had once been her world. As the final numbers were entered into the system, a wave of pride washed over her. She had made it, not because of anyone else's help, but because she had believed in herself and refused to let fear or doubt hold her back. As the days passed, Sophia found herself reflecting on the person she had become. The woman she had been 2 years ago, lost, uncertain, and dependent on validation from others, was long gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who had a vision, and who was determined to see it through. It had taken time to rebuild her confidence, but now that it was firmly in place, there was nothing that could shake it. One morning, as she walked into her office, she saw the team hard at work, collaborating, creating, and building something together. It was a moment of clarity for Sophia. She had done it. She had surrounded herself with people who believed in her vision, who shared her values, and who supported her in every way. Together, they were not just running a business. They were making a difference. It wasn't just about profits and growth. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would last. Sophia had learned that success wasn't just about what you achieved for yourself. It was about the impact you had on the world around you. She had always dreamed of leaving a legacy, but she had never imagined it would look like this. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much her life had changed. A year ago, she would have been caught up in the weight of others' expectations. A year ago, she would have doubted herself, wondered if she was good enough, if she could do it. But now, those doubts seemed like a distant memory. She had found her strength, and it was unwavering. But as the days passed, Sophia felt a stirring inside her, a desire to do more. Her business was thriving, but she wanted to give back, to use her success to help others. She thought back to her time in Tuscany, when she had realized that peace and purpose came from within. She had found her voice, and now she wanted to help others find theirs. It was time to start a new chapter. She began researching ways to use her platform to support other women entrepreneurs, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds. She wanted to create opportunities for them to succeed, just as she had. This was the next step in her journey, building a community, a network of women who could empower each other and rise together. As she moved forward, Sophia knew there would be challenges. There always would be. But she was ready. She had faced the hardest parts of her life already, and each challenge had only made her stronger. Now, she was ready to face whatever came next, not with fear, but with excitement and determination. She had learned to trust herself, and she knew that, no matter what, she would keep moving forward. This was just the beginning. Sophia's story wasn't just about overcoming the past. It was about embracing the future, creating a legacy, and making an impact that would last for generations. She had found her purpose, and now, nothing could stop her. I was sitting at the corner of the sleek, glass-walled conference room, watching the sun set behind the skyline of the city I had built my life in. It was a breathtaking view, one that had once been just a distant dream. Now, it was my reality. And as I gazed out at the bright horizon, I couldn't help but feel that I had finally reached a place in my life where everything made sense. My company was thriving, my team was stronger than ever, and my heart had found a peace I never thought possible. The journey that had started with uncertainty, doubt, and a need for validation had transformed into something far greater, something all my own. I had built my own empire, yes, but I had also built something much more valuable, myself. The woman I had become was not the woman I used to be. She was someone who knew her worth, who had faced countless obstacles, and had overcome them with grace and strength. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about living for myself. For so long, I had sought validation from the people around me, especially from Vincent. I had allowed his disregard for me, his indifference, to define my worth. But now, I understood that my value had never been tied to his attention or approval. It had always been within me. And once I realized that, I was free. As I walked through the office that evening, my steps felt lighter. The weight that had once held me back was gone. I wasn't the woman who had been ignored, the woman who had been overlooked. I was the woman who had taken control of her life, her destiny. And I was ready for whatever came next. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. A part of me hesitated for a moment, but then I answered. Sophia, the voice on the other end said, and I immediately recognized it. It was Vincent. My heart didn't race. No wave of old emotions flooded me. I simply listened. I've been thinking about you, he said, his voice sounding different than I remembered. I've seen everything you've done. You've done well, Sophia. I never told you that before, but I see it now. I let his words sink in, but only for a moment. The past was just that, past. I wasn't the same woman who needed his acknowledgement. I wasn't waiting for him to tell me I had done well. I knew it. I had done well. I had built something on my own, something that was mine and mine alone. Thank you, Vincent, I said, my voice steady, clear. But I've moved on. I'm exactly where I need to be. There was a pause, a silence that hung between us, but I didn't need to fill it with words. I had nothing left to say. I didn't need closure. I didn't need him to apologize, and I didn't need him to validate my success. I had already done that for myself. With one final look at the city, I ended the call. I set the phone down and took a deep breath, a sense of calm washing over me. The journey had come full circle. I had learned to trust myself, to rely on my own strength, and to build a life that was meaningful, not because of what I had or what others thought of me, but because of what I had created from within. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And there was no turning back. I had already won, in the only way that mattered. I sat at my desk, the glow of the computer screen casting a soft light in the otherwise dark room. The city below me was a blanket of lights, a vibrant reminder of how far I had come. It had been a few years now, and every day, I marveled at the life I had created. The company was thriving, growing beyond my expectations. My team was more than just colleagues. They were a support system, a family. We were all building something together, and the energy in the office was contagious. But beyond the business, beyond the success and the achievements, I had found something much more profound. I had found a life of peace and fulfillment, a life I had once only dreamed of. As I sat back, reflecting on everything, I couldn't help but think about how much I had changed. The woman who had once been so uncertain, so desperate for validation, was no longer here. That woman had given way to someone stronger, more confident, and most importantly, someone who knew her worth. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Every challenge, every setback, had become an opportunity for growth. And with each step, I had proven to myself that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. The hardest part of all had been letting go of the past, of Vincent, of the life we once had, of the idea that my worth was tied to someone else's approval. But as I let go, I found freedom. I realized that the only validation I ever needed was my own. I had to stop looking for someone else to tell me I was enough. I had to believe it myself. And once I did, everything changed. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Not to Vincent, not to the world, and not to myself. The success I had built was mine and mine alone. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just the business that had flourished. It was me. I had grown in ways I never imagined possible. I had become a woman who was not only confident in her abilities, but who also understood the value of inner peace. I had built a life that was not just about outward success, but about living authentically. And that was the greatest achievement of all. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked at the screen. It was a familiar number. It was Vincent. Part of me wondered what he wanted after all this time. The last time we spoke, there had been no bitterness, no regrets, just an understanding that we had both moved on. Still, I hesitated for a moment before answering. Sophia, Vincent's voice said, warm, almost tentative. I've been thinking about everything, about what we went through. I just wanted to reach out and tell you how proud I am of you. You've done so well. I sat back in my chair, listening, but the words didn't affect me the way they once would have. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had built this life on my own, and it was exactly what I wanted. Thank you, Vincent, I said, my voice steady calm. But I'm doing just fine. I've found my own way. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and I knew Vincent was processing my words. It wasn't the response he had expected, but it was the truth. I had moved on. I just wanted you to know, he said quietly, that I see it now. I see the woman you've become, and I admire you for it. I smiled, not because I needed his words, but because I knew how far I had come. Thank you, Vincent. But I've already found the life I want. I don't need any validation anymore. With that, I ended the call. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was simply grateful. Grateful for everything I had learned, everything I had built, and for the woman I had become. As I sat there, reflecting on my journey, I knew that my life was mine to shape. The future was full of endless possibilities, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had created something beautiful, something lasting, and that was enough. I was enough.